you know, and if they don't have the tools or resources to protect themselves at the time, then they go into these roles, sort of that survival technique, like unwillingly, like they just sort of transform into that.
For sure.
Or are forced into those roles without even wanting to be there. I mean, because a lot of the traumatic things that happen to our clients, they don't want to happen to them. So, yeah, I think that's important too. And then I always hear too, like with some of my clients who are struggling with their attachment to a violent partner, so there's parts of them that are enraged, truly so angry when the domestic violence or the fights are going on and they want to fight back. But then there's parts of them that are so scared, like they can't fight back. And then I'm always curious, where does that anger go? What do you do with it? You know, where do you store it? How does it come out in other areas of your life? So I think when we have strong reactions to something and they don't just dissipate into the thin air, you know, we definitely keep them somewhere. So I think it's always a good invitation for a conversation. Is it one yet?
Nope. 12:36.
Oh my gosh.
I mean, are there questions?
Oh, this is another important thing. When the parts start waking up, because they will. Very much safety planning around that. Okay, so like when the exiles are breaking free, but some of the clients I work with are always in exiled state. It is always sort of frozen in the past. Like they're very much frozen in the past and living in the trauma and pain every day. So I always say when the parts start waking up or they're starting to feel things, it's very natural to feel like disoriented, confused, overwhelmed, like heavy. Like those can be sort of words you hear at that if they
Well,
are
and I think
waking
that's
up.
also why you're also inviting them to the table and also asking some to step back,
Yeah.
because you're kind of teaching that skill to the client that not at every moment do they always need to be present. And we're beginning to create that sense of self-competency that I can regulate what's coming forward and what's going back.
Yeah.
So you might consider it in like more of a regulation way, that I'm teaching that as I'm inviting some to step back and some to come forward. And I can regulate that, who comes forward and who doesn't, kind of thing.
And usually, like when I ask, you know, is that part here, or is it okay if we talk to that part, you know, and if the client says yes, they usually start immediately with a memory of a time in their life where they felt like really scared. I'm thinking like a lot of times it's like, well, one of my clients just yesterday, like she just said, all I can think about is me scrubbing the floor. And I said, it sounds like that part needs attention. You know, it sounds like that little girl needs some attention. And so how can we be there for her? Because there's just tears. And so I think when you can like build that relationship too, and befriend is another word I like to use. Like how can we befriend that part? Because she needs you. And you know, that's an exiled state of where that part resides. And then it's sort of deconstructing the narrative. So that quote I used, it's like, okay, I was made to believe when I was younger these things about me, but after doing, I think, parts work, maybe some of those things aren't true anymore. And they get to come to those realizations, which is really awesome. So they get to dismantle all these things that they were made to believe, especially survivors of sexual abuse feeling like just objects. Like young girls just feeling like they, that have, like my clients that have become women and think that their body is all that they have to offer, or that's the only thing that's going to make someone happy, when that's really not true. Okay. So checking in. Any questions, thoughts?
So I feel like I'm repeating, but I feel like this is a framework
Yes.
that gives you an opportunity to think about one thing at a time instead of all of the things at the same time.
Yes.
So just giving them vocabulary and tools around, okay, maybe we're not ready to deal with this, but let's deal with this, and which will prepare you to then deal with this. So it's almost like a bookshelf. Like, let's take this book off for a while. Maybe this book takes up more room on your shelf. Maybe this, whatever. Like, let's deal with that.
Compartmentalize.
Yeah.
Or like when Ginger Valentine always pops in my mind when we do this work, because she's always telling me like to fuck off in like a pretty passive way though. Like, I don't want to talk to you about that. I don't need, like, we hear that too. Like, I'm not going to talk about it. I don't need to talk about it. So I started terming that like the guard dog. Like, your guard dog, like, she's a good guard dog and she's been there a lot to protect you, but maybe we can ask her just to rest, to take us like a step back so we can sort of figure out what else is going on. But that comes with, a lot of rapport building. Because even when Ginger's yelling at me, I know she's not really yelling at me.
Mm-hmm. Which is part of the work that you need to do too, as an advocate, being prepared for somebody to yell at you and knowing that they aren't really yelling at you. So, right,
and,
exactly.
Feeling like I've done something wrong. I'm like, what part's that?
Mhm.
So, I think, yes, it can be intimidating and a little confusing, but it really, I think it is really helpful for the clients to know that, I'm not just one part. No. There's many rooms in your system, okay? There's many dwelling places.
I also think it provides a sense of ownership
Yeah.
yourself.
Oh, responsibility. Yeah, I think it gives them accountability too, to own their stuff as well.
Well, and I think
Instead of blending and befriending.
yeah, and I think just in all of the words that you're using, that vocabulary helps them to process some of those things too. Just not having words to describe that is difficult. But when you talk about gratitude for that and stepping up and stepping back, and those are just helps
Parts
to
are
frame.
activated that are not so much liked by the client or understood by the client. I think it's helpful to do the container activity.
Mm-hmm.
What parts do you need to leave here today, and we'll reopen when the next time we meet, so you're not feeling like overwhelmed by that part, or just but if you're feeling overwhelmed, like, just change the vocabulary. How are you treating because really I think it's just how are you treating yourself, because if your inner dialogue is just constantly self-criticism and perfectionism, yikes. There's not a whole lot of self-love, or you're doing a great job, or you're doing the best you can, and I love you, or giving yourself like even like affection, doing all, like, I think it just brings up a lot of good conversations, like, how do you love yourself, and sort of like, who taught you how to love yourself?
I want to ask, when she said container, does people know what that means? Or are people like, I have no idea what she's talking about?
Okay, do you want to, since you're the one okay, the container, I love doing stuff with eyes closed. I don't know, I just think they really can be more present and in the moment. So a container, like visualizing their own container, like what it looks like, the material. I always like say my container smells like lavender. It's really like peaceful for me, and it's just a safe place or a safe container for me to put anything in there that I need to like save or
Not take with me today.
Yeah, like I'm gonna keep it here so I don't take it with me today. And when I'm back in this maybe safe space, reopening that container or what we left in there last time. And when they're like visualizing that or doing imagery in their head, I think it truly like creates a sense of like calmness, or they feel more peaceful with that. Because you got to do some sort of like regulation or breathing, I think, before you end a session like this. Like, let's just take some time, like, for yourself to check in.
You can also have the client draw the container and put what they need to put in there with kids. And also sometimes you can actually create a visual container that you're going to put something in. But I will say that a lot of times clients want to know where that container is going to go, because there's fear about that being out there. So sometimes it's a little bit easier to do a container that they make in their own brain, because that is safe. Like, no one else is going to have access to that. So
I just wonder, and
question. So when we name them the inner child, I wonder what that looks like when you do it with a child. What
I usually say like that's the little you. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Especially with teens too, like
what you're talking.
because they can see that, right? Like sometimes with teens, I'll be like, well, if I brought a 6-year-old in here,
Right.
what would you say about their experience with sexual abuse? Would you say that it was their fault? And that visualization creates something different for them
Right.
because their more mature, older self believes they should have done something
Right.
about that. Those kind of distortions or parts come on later as techniques to cope with that. So I always like to do that to try to create empathy with the younger self
Yeah.
in that way.
That's a good word.
And I think like how parts get exiled too a lot of times is with family dysfunction. Every family has dysfunction. So I think when the children like kind of gets sucked into that vacuum or has to take on certain roles to navigate or live in that dysfunction, a couple ones that these examples, so allying with one or against another parent, and then becoming like a spouse to a parent essentially and caretaking to one of them, maybe caring for other children, the family's financial security, the parent's marital problems, the well-being of a parent. So the child's managers at that point have to take over, and the child has to exile parts that feel frightened, needy, and neglected. So they essentially don't get to be child and their children. They don't have their needs met either. So who takes care of that adult person? I always ask that question. Who takes care of you? I don't know. And that's always like a light bulb moment.
And Kelsey, that's something else we talked about. Like, if you are starting to name some of these, you will get a lot of I don't knows.
Yes.
And just having some space to just
And
let
it's
that
okay,
kind of marinate.
It's okay if you don't know. Like really encouraging them not to feel like defeated or discouraged just because they don't know, because that's a confused part. You know, maybe that was the part that never got to be curious about themselves, or was told that like really nothing was good about them, or they didn't have anything to like bring to the table. So again, just information.
And I feel like a lot of my clients who live in that apathetic or I don't know sort of state, they really have honed that firefighting skill.
Yeah.
And they don't even recognize that that is a survival technique to their experience.
Sure. And how safe it keeps them.
Yeah, because if I have an opinion, then somebody could be upset about
Yeah.
that.
Yes, that's very important.
Thank you, Kelsey.